Welcome to this opportunity to witness the amazing change work of Richard Bandler. In a few moments, we'll witness Dr. Bandler help two people overcome a debilitating habit. Over the years, he has developed many remarkable techniques, some of which we'll see him use and later explain.
Hello, my name is Richard Bandler, and I'm here today with Claire and Kate. And what we're going to do is spend a little time on what's, for them, a problem. Problems come in a whole variety. Some people have deep fears of things. In this case, we have something that I consider to be somewhat simpler. We have some bad habits. And I'm sure these two ladies are not the only two people on the face of the earth to have bad habits. But I refer to bad habits as the chains of the free. That once people become free, they have a tendency to do things which they don't need to do. And this doesn't just happen in societies that are wantedly free like England and some other countries. Freedom comes in various forms. It means that we have spare time, spare money, and spare energy. Now, one of the most common chains, of course, that we hear about these days is smoking. And in Claire's case, Claire, how long have you been smoking?
I stopped for a while, but I've been smoking 3 or 4 years this time, but before that I smoked since
So you actually quit once already?
I did quit once.
Yeah, I have a friend that's quit hundreds of times, quit 5 or 6 times in one day. And Kate has a small problem, and is it that you bite your nails? Is
Yes.
That, pardon?
Yes, I've been biting my nails since I was about 13 or 14.
13 or 14. Do you just bite them, or do you pick at them too?
Both.
Usually people who bite them when they're too busy to bite them pick on their nails too.
It's usually when I'm driving or watching TV.
You do this while you're driving? That's scary. So when you're driving, you stop and bite on your fingernails. And
I keep one hand on the steering wheel, but...
Oh, so you're a safe nail biter and driver. But see, to me, one of the things that I try to teach people in the courses that I've been teaching for 35 years now, I've been trying to develop technologies that help people so that they can get control over their brain. And the nice thing about habits is that they're like a heartbeat. They work automatically. And human beings, as far as I'm concerned, are all good learners. They're able to learn to do things like multiplication is not something that you do consciously. When you say 5 times 5, bang, 25 pops out of the middle of nowhere. If you had to do it consciously, you'd have to go through and count your fingers over and over again. It'd be too much trouble. You'd go in a store and they'd say you were supposed to get 25 something and change, and it'd be there even longer than you would now. The trick is to be able to understand things about how people process information unconsciously. Now, given that you have automated things going on in your mind, I've found out over the years that there's a couple of things that you need just to be ready. Because to me, when people are making changes, one of the things that's very, very important, I think, is that people get fed up with their problem. I've discovered if people aren't really fed up enough with their problems, they have a tendency to either go back to them or to keep them. And given that most things don't cause you overwhelming difficulty, to the degree that a good friend of mine, one of my mentors, was a man, he was 78 years old. He had emphysema and he still smoked, and his doctors were telling him if he didn't quit smoking, he would die. Actually, I was told once he was in the hospital and I went to visit him, and they'd given him a tracheotomy, and he was trying to get a cigarette in the trach tube to light it. And at that point in time, I pointed out to him, I said, perhaps you should just quit smoking. You're in a room with oxygen tanks. And he said, well, I had a justification. He goes, how much longer could I really live anyway? As it turned out, he lived another 35 years. To me, that one of the things you have to do is to begin to look at things and to realize that they don't just impact. I mean, sure, you could smoke for a few more years and maybe you'd get sick, and then maybe you'd quit then, and maybe you wouldn't get sick. My grandfather smoked for years, and some people have better metabolisms. But there's all kinds of things that goes with it. Nowadays, there's the whole thing of there's almost nowhere you can smoke. In the United States, you can't even smoke in your own office if you work there alone. You can actually get arrested in some places. A friend of mine was standing on a public pier in California smoking a cigarette, and the police came by and arrested him. And I think you would go to jail for smoking a cigarette when it wasn't, but 5 years before that, there wasn't anybody on the pier who wasn't smoking. All these Italian fishermen and Portuguese fishermen out there smoking. Now they have to get in their boat in order to be able to smoke. They have more and more rules. Restaurants used to have a non-smoking section. But the truth is there's all kinds of bad drawbacks to any habit. The worst drawback of all is that you don't have control over it, that you don't have a choice. To me, I'm in the business of helping people to have choices. And I know that I worked with Claire once before, and when I worked with her before, there was something else that she had unconsciously where she didn't really have a choice about it. And as far as I can tell, things are going fine, so I know her unconscious. She knows how to be fed up, so to speak. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you, Claire, to just start out with something simple. Because what I'd like you to do is, I know you have your own reasons for wanting to quit. Otherwise, you wouldn't have volunteered for this. That would be crazy. Because you know how I am. I'm sort of relentless about things. I have patients of mine that, 5 years later, I'll suddenly think of one more thing I can do. And I'm knocking on their door, and they're going, look, I'm no longer phobic of things anymore. And I'll go, yeah, but let's just add this piece in just to be sure. Now, most psychiatrists would say that, that if you take away a symptom, that you have to supplement somehow, that they believe that it's not the symptom that's a problem. They believe that there's some kind of an unconscious reasoning process. And I don't believe that at all. I believe that most things work fairly mechanically, that at the bottom line, most of our learnings are put together at the neurochemical level. And understanding how to control our chemistry is important. When people go into states of rage, they do it very, very quickly. It's like people don't suddenly lose their temper over an hour period of time. Somebody walks up and steps on your foot and spills a drink on you, and you sit down at the table, and then slowly over an hour, you suddenly go into rage. It doesn't work that way. It happens quickly. But let me ask you to start out this way, as you know inside your own mind the reasons why you want to stop this behavior. And the unfortunate thing is that the times where this causes you trouble are too far apart. So if there are things like if you wake up in the morning and you have trouble breathing and you can't taste food, and I know you have a pet, and probably your pets, pets always make faces at you when you smoke. I know, and years ago I used to smoke, and if I go and pick up a pack of cigarettes, my dog would start wheezing even before I lit one. It was like, not to mention the fact you have relatives, and there's all kinds of places, and then there are people who have gotten over their smoking by becoming phobic, which drives me crazy. It's almost enough to make me want to smoke. I was in an auditorium one time, and there was only 3 of us in the auditorium. And this is before it opened up. And one of the other people that was there picked up a pack of cigarettes, pulled out a cigarette, and somebody 50 yards away began screaming and yelling, going, I'm allergic to cigarettes, I'll get totally sick, and blah, 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 blah. And the guy put the cigarette back in his packet and walked over and just punched him in the mouth. The guy fell over, and he said, there's more than one way to get hurt. See, to me, the most important thing is that you end up getting control. The reason I asked you to bring your own cigarettes, I like this country, they get serious. Smoking kills. Yeah. There's a good hypnotic subject. It doesn't say who. Try to figure out how to kill somebody with this little box. I've been trying to figure it out all morning. But the truth is that when you have a habit, it doesn't matter whether the habit is biting your nails or whether the habit is smoking or the habit is thing. What happens is that there's a multitude of triggers that after you finish a meal, people have the compulsion. And for a lot of people, it's just that they don't take any time during the course of the day to do anything to give them a feeling of relaxation. And so they develop some mechanism that just notifies them, whether it's gnawing on the end of their fingers, whatever it is, that it becomes a signal for people to learn to take a few moments and relax. Now, I don't know which of these things it is, but what I'd like you to do is to start. Would you put your feet on the floor? Do you mind putting your feet on the floor just for a second here? What I want you to do is I want you to think of 3 or 4 of the absolute worst experiences you've had where you wished you weren't a smoker, where you were embarrassed, like, where it's one of those things where somebody looks at you and goes, you started smoking again? It doesn't matter what they are. You don't have to tell us. All I want you to do is just close your eyes and think of a time when you just wished you had the choice to quit. And I want you to take the image that's in your mind and see what you saw when you were there, hear what you heard, and then double the size of the image. Turn the brightness up, turn the volume up, so that the unpleasantness of the situation literally begins to grow. And then jump to the next one, so that you jump to another one quickly. And then make that one even twice as big. And hear the voices of the people there even louder, so that you begin to take that feeling that's inside you and notice where the feeling starts in your body. And notice how it moves through you with that unpleasantness. And then take the feeling and begin to spin it round and round, so that wherever it moves to, move it back to the beginning and begin to spin it around and around and around till it begins to actually feel as uncomfortable as you possibly can. Then jump to the third situation and begin to double that feeling again and take this until you begin to feel some never again. Because real serious changes in human beings, I learned when I was really young. There was a woman who had been in a terrible situation. Her husband beat her all the time, beat her kids. He was just a cretin. And she kept going back to him. And then suddenly, one day, she said, "That's it." And she never went back to him, and she never had a problem. And I asked her, I said, "What happened?" And she said, "Well, it's the straw that broke the camel's back." And if you take this feeling and spin it fast enough, inside of all of us as human beings, there's a threshold you can go through where something inside of you says, enough is enough, where you're really ready to just take the information I can give you, because there's two sides to this. One is the habit, the other is the addiction. And actually, the addiction isn't nearly as hard as the habit, because you're going to have to find a new way to behave in the old situations. But if you take this feeling and spin it harder and spin it faster until something inside you begins to snap, you'll know when that moment is, because suddenly, instead of seeing what you saw in those situations, you're going to take a look at yourself. And when you see yourself in that situation, you're going to begin to feel some never again. Now, when you look at your situation and you see yourself grabbing for that pack of Marlboros after dinner and having to sneak outside and hide in your car and smoke, when you look at that and it seems silly and you begin to laugh at yourself, this is the first step in real change. A lot of people think that change has to be unpleasant. And those people should go to someone else's seminars, because I don't do it that way. I think that what people have to do is just be fed up with the difficulties they have, and then with an absolute and growing sense of certainty, they need to set out and have a plan about what it takes to change things. Because when you look at yourself, and if you begin to look at all the times and places where you have to engage in really silly things, what happens is you can begin to laugh at the behavior that you were at the mercy of in the past. So that if you look at the situation, they're hiding in the car, smoking a cigarette, out behind the corner of the building like you're in the 7th grade, being out on a date with somebody you just met, and that person starts to talk about how much they dislike smoking, and you begin to push your purse further and further under the table. There's dozens and dozens of situations like this, and the more you run through them in your mind, the sillier it's going to begin to feel to not have the choice that you want. Because if you stop and you think for a minute about that feeling, and you spin that feeling of laughter inside of you, and double it, and double it, and double it again, this in fact is the very strength. Because if you could take this feeling of silliness and even multiply it further, why, if it began to spin faster and faster and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and kept it spinning inside of you, and then suddenly out of nowhere appears a pack of Marlboros, face to face with your own laughter, what happens is you begin to change the way that you feel, not just inside your stomach and your chest, but literally at the neurosynaptic level. Because when you look at cigarettes, you're always asking the question, should I have one or shouldn't I? But instead, if you can just laugh, this is the doorway to freedom. Most people don't understand. They try to overcome their difficulties rather than make it so that their body feels entirely different. Real choice doesn't come from being able to not do something or do something. Real choice comes when you can feel entirely different in the same situation. Now, in a minute, I'm going to do something. I'm just going to reach over and I'm going to lift up your left arm. And when I do, I'm not going to tell you to put it down. But I want your unconscious, which is close enough to hear me, to begin to do something that's very important. Because while you look at the different times and places where you need to laugh at cigarettes, when people walk up and say, Claire, would you like a cigarette? And there are many times when you just feel like you need a cigarette. Maybe you get nervous and you look over and your cigarettes are on the table and they call out to you. They go, Claire, just have a cigarette. Sometimes one is even sticking up or one is sitting on a table. Or you look at an ashtray and you see the ashtray. You see matches and they call out to you. All of those situations. If you take this laughter and you begin to laugh at those things, instead of feeling drawn towards them, you can begin to look at a picture of yourself inside your mind and see yourself in the very situations that you don't have the choice yet. You can see people offering you a cigarette and realize you were out of control. But if instead you saw yourself saying no and not suffering, being at a party with people smoking all around you and not feeling like you have to become an asshole or you have to become somebody who has to smoke, but instead somebody who just giggles because you realize you're becoming the kind of person that you want to be. And if you feel drawn towards that, that can become a much stronger feeling than any addiction. Oddly enough, people have overcome addictions and habits of all kinds. One of my friends became addicted to Valium, and he got so many doctors to give him Valiums. He was taking like 50 to 75